The email arrived with a picture attached. It was from a colleague in London, a fellow art conservator. The subject line was a single word: congratulations. The body of the email was just as brief. Is this your Charlotte? Saw her at the Divine Gala last night. Didn't know she was a fan of Julian Thorne's work. Small world. I clicked on the photo. The resolution was sharp. There, standing in a glittering London art gallery, was my wife Charlotte. She was laughing, a champagne flute in her hand. Her head tilted towards the man beside her. The man was Julian Thorne, the art world's latest enfant terrible, a painter known for his garish, oversized canvases and his even more oversized ego. They were standing in front of one of his paintings, a chaotic slash of neon colors that looked like a fire in a paint factory. Charlotte looked radiant, happy, and very much not like a woman who was supposed to be on a silent meditation and yoga retreat in the Berkshires to find her center. The story she had given me, complete with a detailed itinerary of mindful hikes and juice cleanses, was a meticulously crafted work of fiction. I stared at the photograph, at the lie captured in high definition. The initial feeling was not the hot, jagged shock of betrayal. It was a quieter, colder sensation. The feeling of a conservator looking at a painting under ultraviolet light and seeing an older, hidden signature beneath the new one. It was the feeling of discovering a forgery. My name is Arthur Pendleton, 58 years old, and for 35 years, I have been a conservator of fine art. My work is a slow, patient conversation with the past. I clean away the grime of centuries. I repair the damage of time. I stabilize fragile canvases. But the most important part of my job is authentication. I use science, history, and a deep understanding of materials to determine what is real and what is a lie. I find the anachronistic pigments, the modern canvas fibers in a supposed old master, the hesitation in a forger's brushstroke, trying to mimic a confident hand. My entire life is about seeing what lies beneath the surface. My marriage to Charlotte, I had come to realize over the last few years, was a masterclass in layered deception. She saw my profession as a quaint, dusty affair. You're always so focused on what's dead and gone, Arthur, she'd often say, gesturing around my workshop, a place filled with the quiet dignity of damaged art awaiting restoration. The world is about what's new, what's next. Her world was one of charity galas, gallery openings, and a carefully curated circle of friends who measured worth in auction prices and media mentions. I had for a long time believed we were simply different people who had found a way to coexist. I now understood that she saw our marriage not as a partnership, but as a beautifully decorated room, funded by my quiet, substantial inheritance. A room she was preparing to auction off. The healing retreat was not the first lie. It was just the most brazen. For the past year, I had been running a quiet, private analysis of our life together. I had seen the warning signs, the secretive phone calls, the unexplained credit card charges, the subtle emotional distance that had grown into a chasm. I had seen the way she looked at Julian Thorne at an opening in New York 6 months ago, a look of hungry ambition that I had mistaken for artistic appreciation. She thought I was oblivious, a quiet, scholarly man lost in his world of canvas and pigment, too distracted to notice the truth. She had underestimated me. It's a common mistake. People confuse my quiet nature with a lack of perception. They don't understand that my work has trained me to see the smallest inconsistencies, the slightest deviations from the truth. She didn't know that my quiet analysis of our marriage had already led me to a series of preparatory protective actions, a quiet conversation with my lawyer, a careful restructuring of certain assets, a digital and physical inventory of our shared valuables. I had built a quiet, invisible fortress around the things that truly mattered. Charlotte thought she was on a secret holiday, planning the next phase of her life. She had no idea that back home the man she thought she was deceiving had just been handed the final piece of evidence he needed. The photograph was not the inciting incident. It was the confirmation, the final data point in a long and sorrowful analysis. I saved the image to a secure folder on my computer. The folder was named Provenance. I then walked from my study into the main hall of our large, quiet house. On the wall hung a small, magnificent painting by an impressionist master, a piece that had been in my family for 100 years. It was Charlotte's favorite. She called it the centerpiece of her collection. I looked at it, really looked at it, for the first time in months. The light was different. The texture was subtly wrong. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. The forgery wasn't in a gallery in London. It was hanging on my wall. The painting was a Degas, a small exquisite pastel of two ballet dancers, titled Deux danseuses au repos. It had been the cornerstone of my family's collection, purchased by my great-grandfather in Paris in the 1890s. Its provenance was impeccable. I had personally overseen its conservation and authentication a decade ago, so I knew its every detail, its every delicate layer of pigment, with an intimacy that bordered on the sacred. Standing there in the hall, I felt a profound sense of violation. It was as if a stranger had come into my home and replaced a beloved family photograph with a convincing but soulless replica. The anger that had been a low hum began to sharpen into a focused, cold resolve. This was not just infidelity. This was a calculated, audacious crime. I did not touch the painting. Any action now had to be methodical, documented. I went to my workshop, the one place in the house that was entirely mine, a sanctuary of science and art. I retrieved my conservation toolkit. This was no longer a home, it was a crime scene, and I was the lead forensic investigator. My first step was non-invasive analysis. I used a high-intensity fiber optic light source, running it at a low oblique angle across the surface of the painting. A genuine Degas pastel has a unique complex layering. The particles of pigment sit on top of the paper in a specific way, creating a texture that is almost like a fine dust. Under the raking light, the surface of the painting on my wall looked flat, too smooth. The particles seemed bonded to the paper in a way that suggested a modern printing or reproduction technique, not the delicate application of a master's hand. Next, I brought in the ultraviolet lamp. Under UV radiation, different pigments and varnishes fluoresce in different colors depending on their chemical composition and age. An old varnish will glow a milky green. Certain 19th century pigments have unique signatures. I turned off the lights in the hall, plunging the space into darkness, and switched on the UV lamp. The painting flared to life with a ghastly alien glow. My own records from a decade ago showed that the original Degas had a natural, uneven fluorescence, consistent with its age and materials. The painting on my wall, however, glowed with a flat, uniform, and suspiciously bright purplish blue. It was the telltale sign of modern optical brighteners, chemicals used in modern papers and canvases that were not invented until the mid-20th century. The forgery was not even a particularly sophisticated one, merely a good one. It was designed to fool the naked eye in a well-lit room, not the analytical tools of a trained conservator. It was a forgery created by someone who knew I would be the only person who could spot the fake, and who was confident that I was too distracted, too oblivious, to ever look closely enough. A flashback, sharp and painful. Charlotte, about a year ago, suggesting we have the major pieces in the collection professionally cleaned and reframed for a charity art tour she was organizing. "They're looking a bit dusty, darling," she'd said. "Let's have them looking their best for the tour. I know a wonderful new firm that does brilliant work." I had been busy with a major museum project at the time. I had trusted her. I had agreed. It was the perfect cover story. The paintings would be taken away, and the forgeries would be returned in their place, in new beautiful frames to distract the eye. She had used my trust and my own work as a weapon against me. I documented everything. I took high-resolution photographs under normal light, raking light, and UV light. I logged my observations in a new encrypted file, with the cold, dispassionate language of a conservation report. Subject, Deux danseuses au repos, attributed to Degas. Finding, item is a modern photographic reproduction on treated paper. Pigment and paper composition, inconsistent with 19th century materials. Provenance of frame is recent. Conclusion, not authentic. I checked the other major pieces she had sent out for cleaning. A small Sicily landscape, a Morisot watercolor. One by one, under the unforgiving eye of my equipment, they revealed themselves to be lies. She hadn't just stolen one painting. She had gutted my family's entire collection. The financial value was immense, well into the 8 figures. But the real crime was the violation of history, of legacy, of trust. This was a betrayal so profound it was almost elegant in its depravity. And Julian Thorne, the art world's bad boy, was standing right in the middle of it. His work was flashy and modern, but I knew his reputation. He had started his career as a restorer, and there were rumors, whispers in the conservation community, that his real talent wasn't in creation, but in imitation. He was a brilliant mimic, a master forger who had gone legitimate. He had the skills, the connections, and now, with my wife on his arm, the motive. They had not just started an affair, they had formed a criminal partnership, And their primary asset was the art collection I had naively entrusted to my wife. My next step was clear. This was no longer a personal matter to be solved with a confrontation. This had escalated into a major art fraud case. I needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. I needed a specialist, someone who understood the murky, high-stakes world of art law. I needed someone who knew how to hunt bigger, more dangerous predators than a cheating spouse. I needed Evelyn Sharma. Evelyn Sharma's name was whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in the upper echelons of the art world. She was a former prosecutor for the art crime team at the Department of Justice, who had gone into private practice. Her specialty was asset recovery, specifically the recovery of stolen and fraudulent art. She didn't handle divorces. She handled international conspiracies. Her office was in a sleek, modern building that felt more like a corporate headquarters than a law firm. The art on the walls was all abstract, challenging, and I noted with a professional eye, impeccably authentic. Evelyn herself was in her late 50s, a woman with a razor-sharp intelligence that was evident in her clear, direct gaze. She listened to my story without interruption, her face a mask of professional neutrality. I didn't present it as a grieving husband. I presented it as a conservator reporting a crime. I laid out the evidence systematically. The photograph of Charlotte and Thorne, the UV and infrared photos of the forgeries, the provenance documents for the real paintings, and the timeline of the cleaning and reframing project. I handed her a USB drive containing the encrypted file of my findings. She plugged it into her laptop and reviewed my conservation reports. As she read, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Mr. Pendleton," she said, looking up at me, "your wife and her friend have made two critical mistakes. First, they committed a crime that falls under federal jurisdiction and has no statute of limitations. Second, they committed it against a man who has done a better job of documenting the crime than most police departments could do in a year." "What's our first move?" I asked, feeling for the first time in weeks a sense of having a powerful ally. "Our first move is to operate on two parallel tracks," she explained, her mind already shifting into strategic mode. "Track 1 is legal and overt. We will file a formal police report with the FBI's Art Crime Division. We will present them with your evidence. This will initiate a criminal investigation that will eventually lead to indictments for Thorne and your wife. That, however, is a slow process. Justice can take years. And Track 2 is financial and covert," she said, a predatory glint in her eye. "This is where we get the art back. Or, more likely, its value. Men like Julian Thorne don't steal art to hang it on their walls. They steal it to liquidate it. They convert it into cash as quickly as possible, through a network of discreet private dealers and auction houses. The art is probably already gone, but the money is somewhere. Our job is to find it." This was her world, the murky underbelly of the art market, a place of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and handshake deals. "How do we do that?" "We use the forgery itself as a roadmap," she said, pulling up my photo of the fake Degas on her monitor. "A forgery of this quality is not an off-the-shelf product. It requires a specific set of skills, materials, and techniques. It has a signature, not of the artist it's copying, but of the forger who made it. You, Mr. Pendleton, with your unique expertise, are going to help me identify the forger, and the forger will lead us to Thorne." It was a brilliant strategy. It weaponized my own professional skills. I was no longer just the victim, I was the chief technical expert in the investigation of my own case. I spent the next 2 weeks in my workshop, but I was not restoring art, I was dissecting a crime. I performed a microscopic analysis of the pigments used in the forgeries. I found traces of a specific synthetic ultramarine blue that had only been available for the last 15 years. I analyzed the canvas fibers and found they were a specific linen blend sold by only a handful of high-end art supply companies. I built a profile of the forger. His materials were expensive, his technique was precise, but his knowledge of 19th century chemistry was flawed. He was a modern painter trying to mimic an old master. I compiled a list of 3 potential forgers in Europe known for this level of high-quality reproduction work. Evelyn took my technical report and handed it to her own team of private investigators, a group of former intelligence operatives. They began to discreetly make inquiries in the European art world. While her team worked, Evelyn and I focused on the money trail. We knew Charlotte had been funneling money out of our joint accounts for months, but we needed to know where it was going. I remembered that Charlotte had insisted on using a specific, boutique financial advisory firm to manage her personal portfolio. She had claimed they were more creative than my old conservative investment manager. At the time, I had seen it as another example of her obsession with trendy, expensive services. Now I saw it as a potential link in the chain. Evelyn, with my legal authorization, subpoenaed their records. The advisory firm fought back, citing client confidentiality, but a subpoena is not a request. After a week of legal wrangling, they complied. The documents revealed a series of complex wire transfers. Charlotte had been moving money from her portfolio into a holding company. The holding company's address was in Liechtenstein. The director of the holding company was listed as J.T. Enterprises, Julian Thorne. The connection was now direct, financial, and irrefutable. They had not only stolen the physical art, they had been siphoning my liquid assets to fund their operation. A flashback. Dinner with Charlotte, a few months before she left. She had been lamenting the stagnant returns on my investment portfolio. "Darling, you're so risk-averse," she'd said. "Sometimes you have to be bold to get real returns. You have to speculate." I realized now she wasn't talking about my stocks. She was talking about her own life. She had speculated with my trust, my family's legacy, my life's work, and she was about to find out what happens when a high-risk speculation goes catastrophically wrong. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in an encrypted email from Evelyn's investigators in Paris. They had found the forger. He was a disgruntled former museum restorer who had a known association with Julian Thorne. Under pressure, he had admitted to creating the forgeries, and he had told them where the real paintings had gone. They had been sold, through a private dealer in Geneva, to a shadowy consortium of investors based in the Middle East. The sale price was just over $22 million. We now had the entire picture. The crime, the method, the participants, and the money. The trap was ready. All we needed was for the quarry to walk into it. Charlotte returned from her healing retreat a week later than planned. She sent a text message full of airy apologies and vague explanations. "So sorry, darling. The retreat was so transformative. I decided to stay a few extra days to really integrate the experience. Feeling so centered. Back tomorrow. Can't wait to see you. Ghetto." The casual audacity of the lie was almost impressive. She was returning to the scene of the crime, not with guilt, but with a renewed sense of purpose, likely believing that her grand plan was proceeding flawlessly. The day of her return, I prepared the house. I did not move her things out. I did not leave an angry note. I did the opposite. I created an environment of perfect, unnerving normalcy. I had flowers delivered, her favorite kind. I made a reservation at the expensive, trendy restaurant she loved. I was setting a stage. The conservator in me knows that the presentation of an object is as important as the object itself. The confrontation had to be a carefully controlled environment. She arrived in the early evening, sweeping into the house with a flurry of luggage and exaggerated pronouncements about the virtues of silent meditation. "Arthur, you wouldn't believe it," she said, kissing the air next to my cheek. 10 days of silence, of just being. It changes you. I feel like a new person. "You look well, Charlotte," I said, my voice calm. "Did you find your center?" "Completely," she said, beaming. "I have so much clarity now, about what I want, about what we need." She looked around the hall, her eyes lingering for a moment on the fake degas. She didn't notice a thing. To her, it was just part of the decor, a piece of inventory. We went to dinner. The restaurant was loud, crowded, and filled with the kind of people she admired. People who talked loudly about their deals and their acquisitions. She was in her element. She told me stories about her retreat. Stories that were clearly rehearsed, filled with details about charismatic gurus and life-altering sunrises. I listened patiently. I asked questions. I played the part of the dutiful, slightly boring husband, impressed by her spiritual journey. I was running a diagnostic, observing her behavior, her confidence, her complete lack of any visible guilt. She was a performer, and this was her finest role. It was only when we returned home, back in the quiet of our living room, that I changed the script. I handed her a glass of wine. "Before you unpack," I said, my tone shifting from pleasant to neutral, "there's a small business matter I'd like to discuss with you." She looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Business was my tedious world, not something to be discussed after such a transformative experience. "Can it wait, Arthur?" "No," I said, "I don't think it can." I gestured to the coffee table. On it, I had placed a single slim folder. It was bound in the same simple, professional way as one of my conservation reports. The label on the front read, Provenance Report, The Pendleton Collection. She looked at the folder, her brow furrowed in confusion. What's this? It's a report I've been working on while you were away, I said. I had some concerns about the condition of the collection. After it was returned from the cleaners you hired, I decided to do a full authentication. I watched her face. It was a study in micro-expressions. The initial confusion gave way to a dawning, horrified understanding. The color began to drain from her face. She knew. She didn't know how I knew, but she knew that the game was up. Open it, I said. Her hands trembled as she reached for the folder. She opened it to the first page. It was a high-resolution photograph of the fake Degas hanging in our hall, taken under ultraviolet light. The ghastly modern glow was undeniable. The caption beneath it read, Figure 1, Du danseuse au repos, reproduction. Note the presence of modern optical brighteners, inconsistent with 19th century materials. She flipped to the next page. It was a copy of a wire transfer confirmation, a transfer of 1.2 million euros from a private art dealer in Geneva to a holding company in Liechtenstein. The name of the holding company, JT Enterprises, was circled in red. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a terror that was deeply, satisfyingly real. The confident, spiritual, centered woman was gone. In her place was a common criminal who had just been caught. I don't understand, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Oh, I think you do, I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. I think you understand perfectly. The report is quite thorough. It details the systematic replacement of 6 paintings from my family's collection with high-quality forgeries. It details the subsequent sale of the authentic pieces through a private dealer in Geneva for a sum total of $22,700,000. And it details the laundering of those funds through a shell corporation controlled by your business partner, Mr. Julian Thorne. I let that hang in the air, the sheer weight of the facts pressing down on her. This wasn't an accusation from a jealous husband. This was a statement of fact from a man who had done his research, a man who had the receipts. You have been very busy, Charlotte, I continued, but then, so have I. The fortress of lies she had built around her life had just been breached, and she was standing in the rubble. Charlotte's first instinct was denial. It was a desperate, flailing attempt to rebuild the walls as they were crumbling around her. This is insane, Arthur. It's a fantasy. You're stressed, you're not thinking clearly. Thorne, Julian is a friend. He's an artist. He's an artist. He's a forger, Charlotte, I said, my voice cutting through her panic. A very good one, but not perfect. Turn to page 12 of the report. She fumbled with the pages, her hands shaking. Page 12 contained my microscopic pigment analysis. It showed the side-by-side chemical breakdown of the blue pigment from the forgery and the genuine cerulean blue used by Degas. It was a chemical fingerprint that was as damning as a real one. The forger used a synthetic cobalt chromate, I explained, my tone that of a lecturer in a seminar. It's a common substitute, but its crystalline structure is completely different from the 19th century original. It's a rookie mistake, for someone at his level. I suspect he was in a hurry. She stared at the chemical formulas, the scientific jargon, a language she didn't understand. But the conclusion was inescapable. The painting was a fake. The lie was real. Her denial collapsed, replaced by a second, more dangerous tactic: aggression. She stood up, her face contorted with rage. You spied on me. You went through my things. This is an invasion of privacy. It's illegal. I'll sue you. Everything in that report was obtained through legal and professional channels, I said calmly. I had anticipated this move. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, controlled demolition. Charlotte, faced with the unassailable evidence and the terrifying reality of a federal prison sentence, agreed to every one of Evelyn's terms. She cooperated fully. She provided the account numbers for the offshore holding companies. She signed every legal document put in front of her. Julian Thorne, when confronted by the authorities with the forger's confession and the financial trail, also capitulated. The legal battle was swift and brutal. The $22 million was frozen, and after a complex international legal process, repatriated. The money was placed into a new, separate trust, one that I controlled, but that was designated for charitable causes in the arts. A way of cleansing the money of its tainted history. Charlotte and Thorne were both charged. Thanks to their cooperation, and my own quiet request for leniency, they avoided the harshest possible sentences. Thorne, as the mastermind and a repeat offender, received a 7-year prison sentence. Charlotte, positioned by Evelyn as a manipulated and willing accomplice rather than a co-conspirator, received 5 years of probation and was ordered to perform 2,000 hours of community service. She also had to publicly admit her role in the fraud, a humiliation that for her was likely a harsher sentence than any prison term. The divorce was finalized in a matter of weeks. The terms were simple. She walked away with nothing but her personal belongings and a name that was now synonymous with one of the most audacious art frauds in recent memory. Her social life, the world she had valued above all else, was over. No one wanted to be associated with her. She had traded her comfortable, respected life for a fantasy and had ended up with nothing. I never saw her again. I heard she moved to the West Coast, trying to start over, under a different name. My life, in contrast, became a study in quiet restoration. The large house, now silent and solely mine, began to feel like a home again. I purged it of her influence, not with anger, but with a sense of purpose. I replaced the trendy, soulless furniture with comfortable, well-made pieces. I filled the walls not with high-value assets, but with art that I loved, the work of young, emerging artists, and some of my own modest landscape paintings. I turned my workshop into the heart of the house, a place of creation and quiet contemplation. My work took on a new dimension. The story of the Pendleton forgeries became a quiet legend in the art world. I was offered a position as a consultant for a major museum's acquisitions committee, a role where my skills in authentication were put to their highest and best use. I was no longer just a quiet conservator. I was a guardian of the truth. One day, about a year after the divorce, a large crate arrived at my workshop. It was from the dealer in Geneva. As part of the settlement, they had been required to return the single painting they had not yet sold. It was the Degas. I uncrated it carefully. There it was, the real thing. The delicate layers of pastel, the confident, masterful strokes, the subtle, honest beauty of a genuine work of art. It was like welcoming home a long-lost friend. I spent the next month working on it, not restoring it. It was in perfect condition, but simply cleaning it, examining it, reconnecting with its history, its truth. I hung it back in its rightful place in the hall. It looked different now. It was no longer just a beautiful object or a valuable asset. It was a symbol, a reminder that reality has a weight, a texture, a truth that no forgery can ever replicate. It was a reminder that my life's work, the slow, patient, and often overlooked pursuit of the truth, was the most valuable thing I owned. My house is quiet now, but it is not an empty quiet. It is a peaceful quiet, filled with the things I love. It is a structure built on a solid foundation, free of the rot of deception. I have learned that the most beautiful things in life are not the ones that glitter on the surface, but the ones that are authentic all the way through. And sometimes, the greatest act of conservation is not to repair an object, but to strip away the lies and restore the truth.